second. Thank you, Women in Film and Television, for this wonderful award, and congratulations to my fellow muses. I'm very, very flattered to be in such company. And also a special thanks to my Sesame Street sisters who are here, including those with fur and feathers. I will never forget the first time I saw Sesame Street. I walked into the student union of Carnegie Mellon University, where I was attending, and there on a television screen was a very young, very bald James Earl Jones reciting the alphabet in a very deliberate manner. A, B, C, as the letters flashed over his head. Well, I thought I was watching a show that taught lip reading. It was the most compelling television I had ever seen, so remarkably different than all the television I had watched growing up in the South Bronx. I watched a lot of television when I was growing up because, frankly, there wasn't much else for girls to do. It was a boys' world then, with exclusive clubs like the Boys Club of America and the Police Athletic League. I didn't care. I loved old movies and pored over the television TV guide, highlighting musicals for me to watch. I was religious about watching Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver. I even loved Romper Room, even though the hostess would look at the camera through a make-believe mirror and say, "I see Johnny and Betty and Darla." And I always waited for her to add names like Carmen, y Jose, y Juan, but she never did. In fact, everything I saw on television was foreign, yet mesmerizing to me. Were those houses with lawns real on Father Knows Best? I wondered as I sat on my fire escape. And who were those mothers like Mrs. Cleaver who stayed home and made cookies when mine went to work as a seamstress? Of course, the big question was, if people like those in the movies and television seemed foreign to me, was I also invisible to them? So imagine how charmed I was watching Sesame Street that day at my university. When they cut to the street scene, that was the best to come. What was my stoop and my fire hydrant and my tenement doors doing on television? But the real shocker was seeing Susan and Gordon. It's hard to imagine today, but in 1969, you never saw people of color on television. And if you did, they certainly weren't cheerful, beautiful, and nurturing. So imagine my delight when 2 years later, I was cast as Maria. But of course, my journey from the South Bronx to Sesame Street started way before that. It started when my first muse, fourth grade teacher, Ms. Shirley Pellman, took me to see the movie West Side Story. The world changed for me after I saw that movie, but not for the reasons you might think, though there were exquisite performances all around. It was the shockingly beautiful presentation of things I saw every day. A schoolyard with a corroded, twisted chain link fence looked like modern art. Rooftops were private sanctums where people could express themselves. The turquoise-painted French doors, a color my own mother was very fond of using in her decor, did not blind you, but looked just right. I thought, The people who created those images to tell an old story were really on to something, and I wanted to be a part of that world. My interest in art propelled me to the High School of Performing Arts and then on to Carnegie Mellon University, where I was cast in what became the off-Broadway hit Godspell. And my first audition after Godspell was Sesame Street. When I got cast as Maria, I wanted to know what her character was like. Actors in this room might agree that it's easier to act as you hide behind a character than to simply nakedly be yourself. So I hounded the producers with questions about Maria, and they kept telling me to be myself. But I didn't really get it until the day producer John Stone had the makeup artist remove all my makeup, remarking that after he had gone through all the trouble of casting a real person, they had made me up to look like a Cupid doll. Well, as the makeup artist rubbed my face clean, I understood what Maria should be like me on purpose. The producers wanted a real person on television, similar in appearance and attitude to the inner city children the show was trying to reach. Well, after that, I went crazy with power. Putting dialogue in my own words in English and in Spanish, which must have driven the writers crazy. I frizzed out my hair, I wore my own hip-hugging bell-bottom jeans and my army jackets. If keeping it real was an expression of that time, I did everything I could to make sure Maria came across as real and natural as possible. The humans on the show are so real and accessible that many people believe that Emilio Delgado, who plays Luis, and I actually got married. At an airport once, Emilio and I were approached by a fan who told us how happy and thrilled she was that her children should see real love on television. We told her we weren't actually married. She paused, sucked in her breath, and said, "Well, as long as you really love each other." In this day of muses, I must recall my own, former executive producer Dulcie Singer. When Mr. Hooper died, she insisted we examine the real impact death would have on a child. And when I got married and pregnant, she used those storylines as an opportunity to show Hispanics having the same hopes and dreams as any other people. And when I questioned the Hispanic content on the show, she suggested I write some of the material myself. And boy, did I ever backtrack. I had never written anything before in my life. I needed a tutorial to write a thank you note. I wrote my scenes and mailed them to her on the last day of taping. In case they were so bad, we'd have several months before having to face each other again. Happily, she liked them, they shot my items, and I became a member of the WGA and started hanging out in the control room. It was an eye-opening experience to be behind the camera and see the fine line Dulcie had to walk between broadcasting a funny gag and making sure it had the appropriate message. Dulcie couldn't be here with us today, but let me take this opportunity to publicly thank her for starting a creative life of writing for me. The more I write, the more I realize who I am, what things are important to me, and what I stand for. My children's picture books, No Dogs Allowed, and A Box Full of Kittens are stories of childhood events I've given happy endings to. My novel, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, the coming-of-age story of a young girl, takes place in the social upheaval of Puerto Ricans in El Barrio in 1969. I hadn't realized how important those times were to me until I had written the book. Finally, I'd like to dedicate this award to my friend Emily Squires, who passed away suddenly last November. Emily was the first female director of Sesame Street, one of the first female members of the DGA, and a very active member of this organization, New York Women and Film and Television. Emily, this is for you. Gracias.